don't forget to put this little tube in. So we're here in the southern hemisphere. It's winter time and we are harvesting a little bit of honey. We're not going to harvest all the honey because the bees are a bit hungry at the moment, but we can go ahead and harvest this one frame here just by turning this key. What we're going to discuss today is a topic on heat, because we're getting a lot of questions coming in at the moment about, in the northern hemisphere, the bees are bearding, we've got heat waves, we've got bees all over the front of the hive, and people are naturally a bit concerned about what to do or what they need to do in order to help their hive out in those heat waves. Well, there's the honey there, beautiful, just coming down the tube. I'm going to taste that, see what it's like in this beautiful winter's day. Now normally you don't get to harvest honey in winter in most places, but we're here in the subtropics. We get nice flows during winter. The bees are bringing in a little bit now, so I feel okay about harvesting some, knowing that they're going to go and get that nectar from the flowers, bring it back to the hive to keep it going, because after all, it is their carbohydrate, it is their energy. That's what they need in order to sustain themselves, and lucky for us, they often store more than they need, and we can share some too. And it's just gorgeous watching it come out of the hive. This hive here, you might notice, is unpainted. That's just the western red cedar naturally greying. It doesn't have a nice look. If you like that timber grey look, then that's one thing you can do, is nothing at all in terms of a finish. Now if you've got the Araucaria, we do recommend painting it because that will make it last longer, but the western red cedar does have natural anti-rot properties in it, and it will eventually go a beautiful grey colour. There it is. Nice, beautiful. So getting back to our question, the question is, what do I do with my hive in a heat wave? So northern hemisphere, they're getting a lot of hot days, bees bearding all over the front, and people are often mistaking that for swarming as well. So let's just talk a little bit about it and what we might do about it. So now here we are in our winter, so we don't have a great example to show you, but when the bees are hot, in order to really ventilate the hive properly, a whole lot of bees will have to clear out. Now if you open the side window, you can have a look and see if you've got a lot of bees at the front but then not a whole lot here, then that's exactly what they're doing. They're clearing out to make room to ventilate and cool the hive, and they're so clever at it. They'll go and collect water, they'll fan with their wings, they'll use evaporative cooling in order to cool down the hive. So the chances are you don't have to do anything, the bees have it under control. However, you can help them a little bit by using our screen bottom board and the ventilation controls at the back. I've got a baseboard here to show you just how that works. So this is our baseboard, and the way it works is at the bottom we've got this screen here, and that allows a lot of ventilation to come up through that screen. And it also allows you to trap things like pests and count varroa and so on. So it's a useful thing to have that screened bottom board in place like that. And then at the back here, what we've done is we've put vents up the top. And if you have a look how this works, there's a gap here that air can flow right around the tray and up into the hive. So if you put the vents up, you'll increase ventilation. If you put the vents down, this piece of wood will come in contact with the tray and limit our ventilation. So generally in winter we like to keep it like that. In summer it's like that. But in a heat wave, pull the tray out altogether. So pull that tray out altogether, and what that'll do is allow plenty of airflow. If you have a look at this, you've got air just being able to stream up through this. It's just an open screen now. So that will really give it maximum ventilation, help your hive in a heat wave. So that's what we do with ventilation. Now if you have our classic hive, it's also got a screen bottom board, which is handy too. So what you'll need to do is get this core flute slider, make sure it's in the bottom slot, or take it out altogether to allow maximum ventilation up through the screen on your Flow Hive Classic. The next thing to look at is the insulation. So while most people don't bother with this because bees are incredible at cooling, they're incredible little air conditioners with their collecting water and their evaporative cooling. So generally you don't need to do anything in a heat wave apart from make sure they've got a lot of ventilation. However, if you do want to increase the insulation under the roof here, that will help them as well. This is something you can do in cold times, but you could also use this technique in hot times by adding another inner cover. If you don't have one of them, you could just use a piece of styrofoam box or any kind of extra insulation up here. But when you've got two of these and an air gap between and the roof on top, that'll add quite a lot of insulation from the sun beating down on that roof and help cool your hive also. And when you put the roof on top of that, it does slide over and it fits like that. The only thing you really notice is you've got a white stripe here, the back of the lower inner cover. So it's a handy little technique in extreme cold and in hot. Let's go and have a look at how our honey is going. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. Sophie's going to read them out today. Trace is away on a well-deserved holiday. So any questions coming in, Soph?
Yeah, Seeds, our first question off the bat is, in the hot weather, can you give your bees water? Do they drink water?
Okay, great. So they do need to be able to collect water. Having said that, they will fly a long way to find that water. So you don't need to have a little water source at the front of each hive, for instance. It could be 500 meters away or a kilometer away. And the bees would go and collect that water, bring it back to the hive. It's the last job the bees get to do in their short life as a forager, is to fly out, find water and bring that water back to the hive. Now, that's why you might see bees that are on their last legs dying by the waterside. It's because that might have been their last trip and they might not make it back to the hive. If you have a close look at those bees dying beside your pond or the water source you're looking at, you might notice that their wings are tattered. They've spent many miles flying, foraging for nectar and pollen, and they've worn out their wings. So you might be seeing their last little journey as a worker bee. So you can make a water source though, and in those dry areas where there's not a whole lot around, and also you might like to stop them going to your neighbour's swimming pool, for instance, then you can easily make a feeder, a water feeder, by putting some stones in a pan and just put a dripping tap above that. That's all you need to do. If they've got stones to land on, they'll love that because they will suck the moisture up between the stones. Just a pond of water can often be a bit tricky for them. They can often end up in the water and some of them might drown. So if you give them some stones in there to stand on, they'll really like that. And there's only one more thing you could do, and that's just a teaspoon of salt in probably several litres of water. They'll like that even better because bees need minerals too. There's been some great tests done. Fred Dunn has done a nice example of testing the bees and whether they prefer a little bit salty water or just plain water, and they'll always prefer to have the minerals in it. So if you want to add a little bit of salt to that water, then go ahead. They'll even like that better, and it might prevent them going to the neighbour's salty pool. So water's great, insulation's great under the roof, but probably for most people the only thing you need to do is open up the ventilation down the bottom by removing the tray, and your bees will do the rest.
Awesome, Seeds. Speaking of water, Milkman Pat on TikTok is asking what ocean is that behind you in the distance and whereabouts are we right now?
So we're on the east coast of Australia looking out at the Pacific Ocean, and if you're lucky you might see a whale splash in the distance. The humpbacks are coming past at the moment and they can be very playful, leaping right out of the water. It's an amazing thing.
Awesome. Another question coming through about the honey we're harvesting today, just asking what type of honey this is.
Okay, this is a little bit of a mix today. Sometimes here we can really tell what the floral source is, but of course there's as many different flavours and colours of honey as there are nectar producing flowers. And if I taste this, let me see if I can pick up on it. So tastes like a little bit of a mix to me. It's got a little bit of the melaleuca, the paperbark, which did flower earlier in the autumn, and it's also got something else which I can't work out what it is. So sometimes it can be mixed in a frame. If there's a big flowering of something, you'll often get a whole frame of one thing, and you'll often get different flavours to different frames, which is one of the biggest joys I think about flow hive beekeeping, is being able to harvest and isolate different flavours per frame and really bring that story to the table. It's really quite different to the conventional harvesting that I used to do, where I'd be mixing not only all the frames from one hive, all the honey together, but all the frames from 20 hives. So I would take all the supers off and go through that long process of decapping them all and spinning them in a centrifuge and filling up buckets and so on. So it's really nice to be able to isolate flavours. And if people ask me what is my favourite honey flavour, to me my favourite thing is to have lots of honey flavours, because you just really get to tell the difference between them, and they're often just really unique in flavour. Most of them are just amazing, and some of them are not very nice at all. And I even like to have some not very nice ones, because when you do a little honey tasting, people can go, "Oh, what's that one?" We go, "Oh, that's the possum piss flavour from the red ash tree." And it's just got a very strong, well, pissy flavour, I guess.
Love it, Seeds. We've got an update from Chuck on Facebook. He's in the US and he's saying, yeah, it definitely has been a heat wave. Nearly over 37 degrees Celsius here for the past few days, some rain lately which has helped. He's still been able to harvest about 11 litres of acacia honey from his yard, and his other hives are nearly ready to harvest as well. So good to hear that the honey is still flowing, but yeah, the temperatures are definitely warm over there.
Excellent. Chuck, if you could just chime in and let us know whether you've had to do anything in terms of assisting your bees in the heat wave. Any questions, just put them in the comments. Sophie will read those out.
Love it. We've got Omar on TikTok. He's asking, do bees migrate if they experience too much heat?
They don't. I've never seen them migrate. Look, you can get what's called a meltdown, which is where the hive gets so hot above the 63 degrees C wax melt temperature, and what happens is then you've got a mess. And that's probably the end of that hive, when their wax structure melts, but it's pretty unusual. I've only heard of it once, and there were hives on a rooftop in Melbourne. So you can imagine you're in a heat wave, and they get decent heat waves in Melbourne, and the hives are up on the roof getting all of that radiant heat off the roof material. And what happened was they were sitting inside, and some liquid came dripping down from the light fitting onto the kitchen table, and they went, "Hang on, what's this sticky stuff?" And it was honey and wax melting, finding its way through the roofing somehow, down the wiring, down the light fitting, and onto the table. So that was the end of their rooftop hives. They weren't flow hives. Perhaps if they had the ventilation at the bottom, they might have survived. So that's one thing we do have with the flow hive, is the ability to really open up that ventilation and allow the bees to cool their hive. But generally, that's pretty unusual. The bees will stay there. They'll often get out of the hive, and in an extreme case, all the bees will be out the front waiting for the hive to cool down, and they'll go back in again.
Awesome, Seeds. An interesting one coming through on Instagram from D Taylor saying, I accidentally put my flow super on backwards without realising. The bees are already putting honey in it. Is it going to mess anything up if I flip it to the correct position?
Not at all. We take the flow sepers off all the time for inspections. It's just a matter of popping that off, turning it around and putting it back down again. While you're at it, have a look at your brood, do a little brood inspection, because you may as well while you're there, and then just put it back on this way around. It really is much nicer harvesting the honey at this side of the hive. Make sure you've also got a slope going back to the back here. We've put level bubbles in the side to show you the correct harvesting position, and this one is at the right level. I didn't check it, but it's nice that it is. You can see a bit of capped honey in this window, which is good. So the bees aren't too hungry. Up in this corner you can see they've eaten a bit away though, showing that they are pulling back those resources from the edge of the hive.
Awesome. Another question coming through. What kind of risk is there with wind damage to your hive? I have a large garden on a hill and I would like to set up my beehive, but I know there's a pretty consistent wind that happens through there.
So bees can fly at about 40 kilometers an hour, and they can also fly really low to the ground, so they can avoid wind. Now here we do get a lot of wind in the summertime right up this slope, and what we found is the classic roofs, when the wind got to 80 kilometers an hour, which is a strong sort of bordering on cyclonic wind coming up here, it would lift the roof right off the hive because it's coming up the slope and under the roof here. So that's when we put these little roof locks in. So that's probably all you'll need to do, is just secure your roof down. If you've got the Flow Hive 2, you can use these roof locks on the side. If you've got the classic, you might need to put a little strap over it just to keep that roof on when the winds get really strong. In terms of normal prevailing winds, your bees will be fine. They will work out how to fly in those windy conditions. After all, they're flying a long way, so whether or not it's windy at the start of their journey, it's going to be windy anyway on their journey. So the bees will battle that wind as they do, and incredibly they manage, even in windy climates, to forage up to 6 mile, 10 kilometre radius and bring that nectar and pollen back into the hive. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Awesome seeds. Lorna Reynolds on Facebook is asking, is it bad to put the honey super on when it's hot? I put mine on about a week ago and now it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 37 Celsius.
Yes, adding supers or more boxes when it's hot is a good idea. It increases the room inside the hive and will allow the bees to ventilate more adequately. So it's another thing to add to the list, is in those extreme hot times, you could also add another box so it's not too crowded in there, because after all, the bees are fanning their wings and they try and get a nice convection pattern happening inside the hive, going up and down like that. And if there's too many bees in there, they can't actually get that convection flow going, and that's why a lot of them will hang out the front and enjoy the cool air on the veranda here while the bees ventilate and fan. Not a whole lot here because it's our winter time.
Awesome. Kayleen Jolly's asking, with the Flow Hive, how often do you usually do an inspection?
So that's a great question. Chime in if you've got a hive and you're watching, and let us know how often you inspect your brood in your area, because the answers are quite different depending on where you are. So the best answer will come from your local beekeepers. Here we are having to inspect the brood more than we used to do our varroa mite checks. It has been the case over the last year that as a mandatory requirement, is to do a varroa mite check once in every 16-week period. So that upped the stakes. Previous to that, we were still in the golden era here in Australia, where we could go ahead and inspect the brood maybe at least a couple of times a year. It was conventional to get right through the brood nest with a thorough inspection, but now the requirements as we work out how to deal with the varroa will increase in terms of doing your varroa inspections. So chime in, let us know how often you inspect your hive.
Awesome. G on TikTok may have missed the start of the live, but she's asking, can I leave the tray out overnight on a hot summer's night?
Absolutely. So a lot of people with screen bottom boards, especially in Europe, it's really common to have no tray at all, just an open screen bottom board throughout the whole year, winter, in the snow, and apparently they never get a letter of complaint from the bees. So you can go ahead and leave the tray out altogether if you want to. In cold or hot, we find it useful for catching pests, and I don't know, I just think it's nice to limit the ventilation in the cold winter time by leaving the tray in and putting that vented cover, the vents down direction. So here's our tray we were talking about earlier. Here's our pest management tray and screen bottom board. So the way it works is you've got this screen here. The bees will be chasing beetles and things around the hive. They'll eventually fall down. You can catch them in some cooking oil down in the bottom here. And as you say, you can take that all out and you can have a look at how much ventilation we've got there with free airflow can flow right up through that screen. The bees can really increase that ventilation in a heat wave.
South Seed is asking, what type of climate do bees need to produce honey?
So the thing that bees need to produce honey is a healthy number of bees in the hive. What you want to see is you're opening the side windows, you're seeing a lot of bees. We're in our winter time here, they're a bit low on bees really. You often see a lot more than that in your hive. So you need lots of bees, and that needs to coincide with a good nectar flow. So you need flowers producing nectar. So certain times of year, like springtime, you get the flowers just dripping to the ground with nectar. Those bees can just rush out and really bring that nectar back into the hive, and it can get really exciting with bees filling a whole super like this in a couple of weeks, and you harvest it and they fill it up again in a couple of weeks later, and that can be a quite exciting experience. But equally, you can get times of the year, or perhaps your hive is a bit weak, perhaps the queen's failing, perhaps there's an issue and there isn't enough honey stores to share some too. So patience is a good ingredient when you're waiting for the bees to store some honey as well.
Love it. Daphne on YouTube is asking, I live on a pretty steep hill. How much should I level the area that I'm planning to put my hives on? Any advice would be amazing.
So you can keep hives on a steep slope. Here we're on a slope here. I do wish we had have shifted these blocks a bit further forward, because it really is quite slopey right behind the hive here, and when it gets wet it's a bit slippery. However, if you're comfortable dealing with a slope, all you really need to level is an area right under the hive, or putting a block like this could save you leveling a large area of ground. If you have the choice, a little bit of flat around is nice for working the hive and doing your brood inspections.
Amazing. Leonard is asking, I'm from the Philippines. May I know where I can order that mini bee house?
Okay. If you're talking about the flow hive, then get in touch. We have a whole crew here working hard in the hive to help you. So chime in at honeyflow.com and we will assist you to get going in the Philippines. I've travelled around the Philippines, wonderful place, and hopefully you'll be able to find some Apis mellifera there, which is the European honey bee you need to put in your flow hive. And if you're talking about a pollinator house, then get in touch as well. The little one for native solitary bees is a nice little family project where you get to make little homes for our native bees that really are the unsung heroes of our world, going out and doing the pollination. And there's certain types of flowers that really need those native bee species, because they might have a specific size of flower where big bees like this can't do the work pollinating.
Awesome. Jill Greenway on Instagram is asking, I'm using the tray to help with SHB, which I believe is hive beetle. What options are there if the tray is out to help with that?
Rightly so. If you've taken the tray out for maximum ventilation, then you won't be able to use it to catch the beetles. Now, you could go ahead and put different types of beetle traps you can order actually inside the hive, but then it's a case of pulling apart the hive in order to do the maintenance on those beetle traps. But what I find is those times when you've got a lot of bees in your hive, you're unlikely to need to do anything about the beetles at all. It's really when the numbers of bees decrease and there's really not enough bees to chase all the beetles around the hive that you can run into issues. So you may not need to catch the beetles if you've got a lot of bees in your hive, which is typical in those hotter times.
Awesome. Jean Michael is asking, would the Caribbean and Tigua be suitable, or is the climate humidity too much here for bees?
Bees are incredible little creatures in that they can handle just about any climate, from extreme cold. We've been filming our customers right up into Alaska, but also they can be in tropical areas like Hawaii and lots of other tropical zones. So we have here in Australia, we've got really extreme cold, we've got dry desert, and we've got tropical regions up north. And your bees will be fine in those tropical areas. Now, some areas of the world have other types of bees in those tropical zones, like the Asian honeybee, which you can modify your hive a bit and get it to work with flow frames. But generally speaking, our hive is built for Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, the one that does an extreme amount of pollination and the one that humans have dragged all around the world wherever they go in order to do their pollination and produce extraordinary amounts of honey.
Awesome. On that note, Seeds, if you are living in a tropical area, is it safe to move your hives around if there's a storm warning, or is it better to anchor them down?
Okay, cyclones. I think, although I definitely love my beehives, I'd probably be focusing on other things when there's a cyclone coming, but in terms of moving your hive, that is. But what you can do in those cyclonic regions, what you should do is put a tie down on your hive. So you put a strap right over the roof like this and right around the hive like that, and that'll just stop this roof blowing off. You could tie it down to the ground if you're expecting extreme cyclonic winds, but generally your bees will be okay depending on how extreme it is. But yes, I wouldn't go deciding to pack up your hives and move them interstate when a cyclone's coming. I would tie your hives down, focus on your family.
Awesome. Seeds. Dan is asking, I have a lot of canola farming around me and I'm concerned about crystallized honey in the flow hive. Do you have any advice here?
So in the beginning, there was a lot of people worried about crystallized honey in the flow frames. And I was too, to be perfectly honest. Before launch, a couple of years before launch, I was doing tests. What I'd do is I would get the melaleuca, the paper bark, which does crystallize really quite easily, and I would take a frame out and put it in the freezer to get it really nice and crystallized, put it back in and see if I could harvest the honey from it. What I found is that the parts would try to move when it was really totally crystallized, and that would trigger the bees to chew the cappings off, chew out the honey, and then the whole process would start again, and hopefully next time you'd get some liquid honey. So crystallized honey is hard to extract from any type of hive, a flow hive or a conventional hive, because it sets in the frames sometimes. Having said that, with canola, the experience is it's usually when beekeepers take a box of honey off and it's in transit or waiting for the frames to be extracted, that the crystallization sets in when the temperature really drops. When you've got a situation like this where your bees are keeping the brood nest warm and that heat is moving up into the hive, usually your canola honey won't crystallize in the hive. So what I would suggest is harvesting early and harvesting often in canola, and what you'll find is it'll come out liquid and then it will set in the jar once it cools down on your shelf.
Kitty Hawk is just joining us on YouTube. She's asking, can I remove the bottom tray from the flow hive to increase air circulation as the bees are beating on my platform and my hive?
Yes, absolutely. That was a question we did answer earlier on, but let's go over it again. You've got your screen bottom board here, so you've got a lot of ventilation control options here. You can have vents up, which allows air to flow through them, up between the tray and up into the hive, or if you want more ventilation, you can take that out and, as you say, take your tray out, and you've got an extreme amount of ventilation there to assist your hive in those times where there's a heat wave. Having said that, bees are usually quite adept at cooling their hive. Even if you don't have a screen bottom board, they will fan at the entrance, they'll collect water, they'll use evaporative cooling techniques and manage to cool the hive down even in heat waves. So don't worry too much, but you can assist them by taking the tray out and providing maximum ventilation. Another thing we covered was adding a bit of insulation under the roof, which I'll just show you quickly here. So if you've got a second inner cover around, you can go ahead and double it up. So we've got two here, and when you put a second one on top, you've got some extra insulation under the roof, which can help in cold times, and it can also help in those hotter times. Or you can go ahead and put any kind of insulating material in this area, and that will stop some of the heat that's landing on the roof getting through into the hive. Flow hives have a lot more insulation than you've got the inner cover. However, you can go ahead and make it even more cushy for your bees by adding more insulation under the roof with an extra inner cover or any kind of insulation material under the gable. Any questions? Chime in. If you've got answers to other people's questions, it's great to see people jumping in and answering those as well. We're getting a lot of questions about heat coming through because in the Northern Hemisphere there's been lots of heat waves, so it's been good to discuss that. Let us know what else is on your mind.
Awesome, Seeds. Many questions coming through. We've got Michael McDermott on YouTube saying, good morning guys, just wondering if you have a comment on carniolan queens for the temperate climate.
Okay, I did order Canolian queens once, and they're said to forage a little bit further than the Italians and be better at throttling their laying of eggs. The queen will throttle her laying of eggs better to the nectar flow, which is good, because you don't want a whole lot of baby bees chewing up all of the available resources when there's not much around to collect. Having said that, I think it's just best to order the queens off your local queen breeder, and they will be breeding ones that are suited to your area, and they'll have their favourites. I don't think it matters too much whether they're Caucasian, Italian, Canolian or what have you. It's more about ordering some with nice, gentle, calm genetics and hopefully productive as well.
Amazing. We've got a lot of people joining us from all over the world. We've got one beekeeper from Morocco saying he has a very hot hive that cannot be approached easily. So just be careful there. And then another question coming through about protecting a hive from bears, Seeds, if you've got any advice there.
Okay, let's start with the hot hive. I'm assuming you mean they're a little defensive and aggressive when you're near the hive. So as said, yes, wear your protective gear when you're close to a hive like that. But if you do want to change its genetics to be a nice calm hive like this one, then you'll need to get in there, take away the queen, and then a day later insert a new queen into the hive and a month later you'll find that genetics and the temperament will change over, because all of those aggressive guard bees would have died by then, because they only live 4 to 6 weeks in those busy foraging times. So if you find that process a bit daunting, that's understandable. You might want an experienced beekeeper, if you need that, to come in and help you find and take away the old queen before you introduce the new one. When a new one comes, you can order them in a little queen cage like this. There's usually a queen in there and about 5 escort bees to feed her while she's in transit, a block of candy at the end. You'll put it between the frames like this in your brood nest. The candy will be chewed away and the queen will be released a couple of days later when the hive has then gotten used to her pheromone. Put the tube on the upward side so that any escort bees that die don't block the escape path once that candy block has been chewed away. And what was that second question there, Sophie?
Yeah, just any tips for keeping bears out too, Cedar?
Okay, now bears is something I've never had to deal with in terms of beehives, luckily. It's kind of a frightening thing. I mean, we have some pretty crazy animals here in Australia, but bears is something we don't have. So bears, they like eating the honey and the brood down here, so they will rip apart beehives and spread them everywhere. I've seen some photos of parts of hives spread all over the place, and they can decimate hives. So what I have heard people do is electric fencing around their hives, so when the bears come to get that honey, they get a good zap on the nose and hopefully they'll leave your hives alone. I've also heard people putting hives inside old vehicles in order to keep them away from bears, so the bees can fly in and out the windows of the vehicle, and but the bears can't get in. So chime in if you've got any ideas on how to deal with bears and let us know how you go.
Awesome. We've got Christina on Instagram. She's saying, I had to requeen my hive and they are rebuilding brood, but frames are mostly full. Should I add a second brood box? I wasn't sure if that would be more disruptive during the adjustment period.
Okay, so you've got your bottom box, you've added this box, they've filled up the frames, and you're wondering whether to add another brood box in between. Is that correct, Soph?
Yeah, that's right, Cedar.
So you can go ahead and add another brood box for sure. The advantages of adding another box is they're less likely to swarm in springtime because there's more space in the hive, and overcrowding is the primary trigger of the hive swarming in the springtime. So one form of spring management is to add another super or another brood box. The reason why I like to run it like this is it's much easier to find the queen and do your brood inspections if you've only got a single box. So I tend to run the hive smaller, and that way it's just a bit easier to lift off the boxes in order to do your brood inspections, a bit easier to manage the hives. And for me, I prefer to keep harvesting honey and storing that honey on the shelf than I do storing honey in boxes on the hive, because once you've got a whole lot of supers you need to add, then you'll be taking them off again in the winter, then adding them again in the summer. They all need to be stored somewhere. They need to take up place in your space in your garage or shed. The wax moth get into them, the vermin get into them, etc. It's a whole management thing to deal with, is all of the sticky boxes, they call them, in conventional harvest. I used to do it. I used to take off a lot of boxes, put on a lot of boxes, harvesting in the conventional way. I'm really happy just to keep it in a very simple configuration like this. However, in colder climates it is typical to add a second brood box in order for there to be just more stores inside the hive for your bees to survive a long, cold, snowy winter. So if you live in a really cold climate, then it's probably a good idea to go ahead and add a second brood box. The bees will store a lot of honey in there and probably a bit of brood, and that way they'll have those stores for the long, cold winter ahead.
Awesome. GRS Worldwide on Instagram is asking, my bees are starting to move into the super. What should I see in terms of action, and how long before I see wax and honey starting?
Okay, so we do have a fairly fresh frame added to this hive. So we're not seeing a whole lot of action here, and in fact I can hardly see any bees at all. So I'm not expecting this hive to be storing honey anytime soon. When you can see a lot of bees here and that coincides with a good nectar flow, that's when you'll see honey stores in your flow frames. Now, if you're getting impatient, you can go ahead and scrape some wax off the top of your wooden brood frames down the bottom here. Use your hive tool, just mash it into the flow frame surface, put that on the windowside, and you can enjoy watching them recycle the wax in the surrounding area. And that'll get them started on that flow frame, but you still won't get any honey stores until you have a good nectar flow and a lot of bees in your box. So one of the major tips there is patience. And sometimes it can be hard waiting for your bees to store honey. Another tip is, if you do have multiple boxes, reduce the size of your hive to this configuration with a single brood box and a single super, and you'll see honey stores in the flow frames a lot quicker.
We've got Lucy Pubin joining us on Facebook, based in Northeast Ohio, US. May have missed the start of this live as well, but just asking, would removing or turning the entrance reducer to the largest opening help with ventilation with all this heat?
Absolutely. So I don't have an example of an entrance reducer here. We don't often use them, but if you do have an entrance reducer, take that off in those hotter times. Allow maximum ventilation in the entrance area where the bees can do their fanning. Go ahead and also pull out the tray too, which will allow a lot of ventilation up through the screen bottom board you can see here. So once you've pulled out that tray, you can see just how much ventilation you've got coming up into your hive. And on the classic hive, here you'll be removing your core flute slider in order to allow the ventilation to come up through the screen bottom board.
Awesome. CJ Cat on Instagram is asking, I'm helping a guy whose flow hive doesn't turn. It's almost like it's stuck. Do you have any tips to get that to move?
If you've had your flow frames full of honey for a very long time, sometimes they are resistant to move. Now we've built in flexibility in the top of the frame on purpose so that if your frames are stuck or full of candy, the frame parts won't break. So you turn it and it's quite hard to turn, but you're just seeing the top flexing like this and the parts aren't moving. So the first thing to try is 2 keys. So insert 2 keys like this and turn it like a butterfly and leave it there for half an hour and see if that will lift those frame parts. If it's still stubborn, then there's a few things you can do. One is wait for a hotter day, or you could remove the frame, put it in a black tub, leave those keys in the top, applying pressure, and they should release and slide up when the temperature increases. If you don't want to do that, there's another quick job you can do in an extreme situation where your flow frame parts are really stuck together with a lot of old wax and propolis. And that's, you take a frame out, you sit it on top here, and you get a knife, like a butter knife, and you just run it down between the frame parts. And what you're doing is breaking the propolis and wax that's gluing together that central spine that runs down between each cell. And you go along and do that, you put it back in, then you can harvest your frame straight away. After that, if you get back to your hive once they've filled it up, it should free up the movement for you. Another tip is when you finish harvesting, which we might show you just over here, make sure you are closing the frame properly. Leave that key in the top slot turned for a minute or two to make sure all the parts go down. Because if you can imagine, you haven't done a great job of putting the cells back into position. There's a lot of wax and propolis on them. If they come down and end up like that, then next time you go to harvest, you put the key in and try and lift it, and there's just not a whole lot of movement in order to break that wax, and that can lead to spillage in the hive and frames that can't move as well. So if you've got frame parts that aren't well aligned and they're really waxy, there's a couple of options for you as well. One is you could harvest the honey, or attempt to harvest the honey. You could take that frame out and you could blast all the old wax off with a pressure washer, or even better, feed the hot water to the pressure washer to really clean that wax off, let it dry, and you can get a new lease of life on your flow frames. People find after about 5 years or so of the frames being used in the hive, giving them a good pressure washing is a good idea to clean off some of that old wax and propolis. The tip with that is make sure the frame's supported. You don't want it to bend too much and fall apart, so lean it up against something, set it in open position and blast the wax off like that, and that will clean a whole lot of the wax off. Another thing you can do is just leave your keys in the top position, turned for a while, really push all those parts back down. If it's a nice hot day, you'll find after a while they'll probably slide down into position anyway, without having to remove the frame from the hive. I'll go and show you the finished harvest procedure. So when it comes time to finish your harvesting, now this wasn't a full frame of honey, we knew that, but we've still got a fair bit of honey out of it, which is fantastic. And to finish our harvesting process, we go back to a 90, we come out, we go into the top slot all the way to the back, and then we turn it to a 90 again. And what that's done is it's moved all of those parts back into the cell formed position. Now, if I hurry off like this, we might find they just bounce back up a little bit. So a tip there is leave it in that position for a while, for a minute or two if you can, in order for all of the frame parts to move into their cell formed position. And while you're packing up, you can just leave the key there, and the last thing you can do is take the key away. So in this case, what we're going to do is take this tube out and do the quick hot swap of putting in our cap like that. This you can just enjoy the spoils, or you can lean it right up against the edge of the jar like that for the remaining honey to go back in. Don't leave it out for the bees. You can see there's no bees that have come for the honey today, even though they are hungry. They just haven't found it, which is often the case. But if they are coming for the honey, you'll need to cover up your jar while you're harvesting as well. But look at that, we've got a beautiful amount of honey there, and we can close up that jar. Again, don't leave this around for the bees. You don't want them to get in to a robbing mentality. Do take that back to the kitchen and wash that for next time. Yum yum. Now it's time to then take your key out after that minute or so, and you almost get a feel for it, that the resistance is less now when you turn it into a 90 again, and that's an indication that all those parts have moved down. If it's still really hard to turn this key, then perhaps you need to leave it in there a little bit longer. Then we go back to a 90, take our key out like that, and the hive can be put back together, and away we go with enough honey for breakfast. Got time for one more question?
Awesome. Seeds. On the topic of today, we've got Chris Colombo. He's joining us from the US in the heat wave at the moment too. He's saying, I've taken my yellow tray out and I've noticed my bees are not bearding now in the heat. Is it okay to keep my tray out for a while?
Fantastic. So that's a great example. Yes, you can leave the yellow tray out permanently if you like. The bees will be fine. Next time you go to harvest, put it back in though, just in case you do get some spills running down through the hive. You don't want them to fall down for other bees to come and forage on. So otherwise you can leave your tray out altogether and allow maximum ventilation. Even in the winter time, your bees will be fine with ventilation running up through the hive. Just, I guess it might be more of a human thing, but I think, geez, it's nice to put the tray in the cold winter time. But in Europe, apparently they often run screen bottom boards all year round, even when there's a lot of snow, and they don't get a letter of complaint from the bees. So go ahead, remove that tray, allow maximum ventilation in the heat wave, and that will assist your bees. Thank you for tuning in with your example there. And thanks for all your great questions. Let us know what you'd like us to cover next week, and we'll be back with another show and tell and answering questions. If you want a helping hand with an online beekeeping course, do have a look at the beekeeper.org. We've put a lot of effort into creating high quality training material in order to take people from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. Gets rave reviews. It's got experts from all over the world tuning in and making content for the beekeeper.org. So a lot of different climates that we don't have here, and it's also an amazing fundraiser. It's free to try. We've raised a lot of funds now, and we've already created billions of safe blossoms for the bees to forage on all around the world. So we're very excited with what we do at the beekeeper.org. So tune in if you do want an online high quality video training course. Catch you next week, same time, same place.